Digital 410 proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. And it seems like we were just here 4 days ago. Oh, that's right, we were. We were last live on Wednesday, which is kind of thrown off my week already. Yeah, it's kind of weird to have a great show and then a few days later come back and line up another show. But joining us, as always, Mr. Henry Sledge. Henry, how you doing tonight, sir?
It is a little discombobulating, is it not? When instead of our normal Monday, we do Monday, Wednesday, and then Monday.
Well, in this case, I went Tuesday, Wednesday. You and I got together Saturday night and did a little recording. And then tonight's Monday, and then I got another show tomorrow. So, yeah, it really just kind of pushes the show together. Jeff cannot join us tonight, as some of y'all know. There's some crazy weather around the world, and some of it's landing in Jeff's area. Now, you all know Jeff lives in Texas, but what you don't know is Jeff lives in Texas. Like Texas as in like hard to get home internet. And so he joins us from sky-based internet, i.e. his hotspot and all that, but with the snow and all the weird weather they're having, just it wasn't going to work out for him. So hopefully he'll be back next week. But Henry and I are here, and we're going to bring some more fun to you. Henry, I think what we should do is start off the show with what we recorded on Saturday so that we can give everybody a heads up who are members of Patreon, and so they know what to look out for.
You have some of that ready to go?
Oh, yeah. I'm on it. Now, after the show,
I look forward to hearing it.
Well, it's without any further ado. Here we go.
One of the really powerful things that I recall from the miniseries was how they represented one of my dad's favorite dogs, and that was his Cocker Spaniel named Deacon. I remember my dad talking about Deacon many times as I was growing up, and I knew that my dad really liked Cocker Spaniels, but Deacon was just one of his special pets. And I mean, dogs were really important to us. Our dogs were like members of the family when I was growing up, and they were always like that to my dad when he was growing up.
Son, Eugene, I'm sorry.
I know in part 10 when he gets the letter from my grandfather talking about how Deacon had been hit by a car and had managed to crawl home and died in my grandfather's arms, and then my grandfather had to write my dad and tell him that. And I mean, they were like around Half Moon Hill, somewhere in the mud fields of Okinawa, still trying to crack the Shuri Heights area, which was of course the absolute bedrock of the Japanese defensive system on southern Okinawa. And it was there, it's just sitting in a muddy, filthy foxhole when my dad got that letter from my grandfather telling him that Deacon had died.
Ready? Lift.
You, G? My dog died. I'm sorry.
He was a good dog.
How old was he?
Got him as a pup about 9 years ago. Maybe 10.
They say dogs live what? 7 years to every one of ours?
And it was just such a hard emotional time for him.
What do you think, fella?
Well, it definitely. I mean, those are the right tracks. It's hard because there's no like background noise, no music. It's tough just from the audio to really get the significance of that, man. I mean, there's a lot of dead air, I guess, but I
No,
mean, you
wasn't
couldn't
dead
help
air.
that.
That's your Zoom. As you discovered last time, when you go back and listen to it, you'll hear all the background music. You'll hear everything you're looking for. It's just for
Okay,
some reason I play
well,
it through
good.
Zoom.
Okay.
But no,
Hey,
and for y'all listening at home, that's just a hint. We got more things coming. That was an idea of Henry's, which I think was a great idea to try to present to the audience some thoughts on, how the miniseries, how his family felt about it and how certain things were portrayed and how he felt about it. So if you like that, keep tuning back in because we're going to have more of it coming.
sorry if I sound like I'm questioning your production skills,
No worries.
because that's not what I was doing.
No worries.
I forgot as soon as I said that. I'm like, yeah, man, it was the same way. And then when I listened to it on Spotify on the way to work, it was like, yeah, it's perfect. I hear the Corsairs flying over. I hear, all the background. I hear the gear clinking when they're marching down West Road. And it really worked. It totally worked. So, yeah.
No, I think Zoom takes out a lot of that, thinking it's background noise, so that when people are having conferences, they don't hear all the stuff in the background. Like I just had to get up and shut the door because one of my birds started screaming for whatever reason. But
Well, that really helps.
But no, I think it turned out well. And the reason I also want to play it is you and we were probably recording for about an hour and a half or so Saturday night. And so for those of you who are members of the Patreon, and if you're not, head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com or D-410.com. Click on the Patreon link. Sign up and subscribe. It only costs you $1 a month. Goes a long way to help out what we're doing here. Reason I bring all that up, if you're a fan of podcasts or radio or voiceover work and you kind of want to take a look behind the curtain and see how the peanut butter's made, with the exception of some stuff I took out of there, there's about a good 38-minute, what we tend to call the OG5 podcast, but it's background. You're sitting in with Henry and I on the session, how we come up with ideas, Henry telling me what clips he wants to play. So if you kind of want to see how that bit was produced and thought up, plus the other one's coming down the road, a little sneak peek, head over to Patreon, and that should be up sometime tomorrow. And for those of you guys who are already there, you can enjoy that and download it through the app and listen to it at your leisure. So little extra treat for those of you guys who help support the channel in more ways than just listening.
Yeah, and I mean we're just trying to put stuff out there to add another dimension to the way that we engage with our passion for the subject, for World War II history. And we were always thinking of new things to do to try to keep it interesting.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to reach out to us, because we've had some great emails coming in lately and we want to hear more, email us at mailcall@WTSPWorldWar2.com. And I figure while we're doing audio clips, hopefully this will come through. One of the things Jeff and I and Henry have talked about over the years is we try to talk about stuff that's not talked about a whole lot or beat over the head. We try to come up with new subject matters, but there's a lot of stuff that we're not exactly up to speed on. And one of the things I said, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 episodes ago is I don't know too much on the North Africa campaign. We don't talk about it a lot here. And it's just not in one of my strong wheelhouses. Are you big on that particular campaign?
The Mediterranean theater, I would say, is definitely a weak spot for me. And it's funny you bring that up because my friend James Holland, who, as you know, I'm reading his book Big Week, like last week and still reading it now. He has a book that he wrote on Sicily. And I listen to his podcast, him and Al Murray, quite a bit. They talk about Sicily, Italy, the Med, how that juxtaposes with the rest of, because everything in World War II is just like a massive puzzle with all these different pieces and everything interlocks, maybe not directly, but everything has a cascading effect in some way. And he talks quite a bit about the Med. And
as the name implies, which I think oftentimes gets overlooked, the war happened more than just in the Pacific and European theater.
Exactly. Yeah.
In this particular case, I don't know a whole lot about the desert fighting in Egypt, Tobruk, North Africa, all those areas. And so I was going through Amazon this weekend, and I came across a little show that I was unaware of called Rogue Heroes. Are you familiar with this show?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It's based off the book, and it's about the inception of the SAS, the British Special Air Services.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to play the clip. If you're into World War II, but maybe your counterpart's not, and they're tired of watching World War II based stuff, they'll enjoy this show because, yes, it's World War II, and yes, it's authentic, and it's semi-biographical. At the beginning of every episode, it has a disclaimer. It says, all the events, as absurd and impractical as they may seem, are all mostly true. Because how the SAS came to life and how they got to be formed is a quandary of happenstance, comedy, and right place at the wrong time. And so this series, it's on MGM streaming service, MGM Plus. But if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can watch the first 3 episodes for free, and then trial version for 7 days, and you just cancel it, and you can watch all 6 or 7 episodes. But the reason I say this would be great for a counterpart who's not heavily in World War II is, yes, it takes place in World War II, but it's done in a styling as if you're watching a modern day show. Now, if you're really hardcore into the nitpicking stuff, get over the fact that AC/DC is pretty much the soundtrack. AC/DC and Motorhead are pretty much the soundtracks on these episodes.
Okay, that's really interesting because AC/DC, as you know, is one of my all-time favorite rock bands. They are the soundtrack.
AC/DC and Motorhead, at least for the first 4 episodes. Like I said, it's World War II. The authenticity is there, but they try to modernize it to make it not seem dusty and history. It's like watching a modern-day show. And because of how things happen, there's some comedy written into it. I'm going to play the trailer for it, and you can get a juxt of it, and then I'll give you guys a brief history. I don't want to go full into the SAS because it'll be spoiler alerts for this TV show, so maybe in a few, a few weeks or something, we'll get a little more into it. But here is a sneak preview of the it's a series on Amazon who is streaming for MGM Plus.
In a world where there are no rules, no order, no organized plan, certain men must take matters into their own hands.
A map? Oh goodness, this must be serious. The Germans keep advancing while we fold our arms. I have an idea that might move the war in our favor.
We're bringing together men of a particular caliber, and you are amongst them.
Finally, I feel at home.
Welcome to this new brigade, the SAS.
Who are the SAS?
You are the SAS, the Special Air Service.
The British are losing the war, and I intend to do something about it.
This is SAS base camp.
We have a license to behave badly. How many women have you slept with, Rob?
12, sir.
Welcome to the SAS. We have only one order. Go, kill, return.
Good evening. I hope I did no permanent damage.
We are a long shot. A shot in the dark. But at least we are a shot.
Hangover?
Memories of Scotland.
Let's go and win the war.
You are mud. At last. He gets it.
Being produced by Epic. It is streaming on MGM Plus, but you can watch it on Amazon Prime, free trial. It's great. Before we get, I'm just going to give you a brief history of the SAS, and then we'll go into maybe the first episode or two. I don't want to give away a lot of spoilers, but just the type of comedy but truth that was in there. So we're going to skip to the second paragraph on Wikipedia. The Special Air Services was a unit of the British Army during the Second World War that was formed on July 1941 by David Sterling, who is one of the main stars in the TV show. Originally called the L Detachment, Special Air Services Brigade, the L designation, and Air Service name being a tie-in to the British disinformation campaign, trying to deceive the Axis into thinking that there was a paratrooper regiment with numerous units operating in the area. In the parentheses, the real SAS would prove to the Axis that the fake idea now existed. It was conceived as a commando force to operate behind enemy lines in North Africa campaign, and initially consisted of 5 officers and 60 other ranks. In its very first mission on November 1941, they parachuted into the desert to get behind the enemy lines of the German troops. And as they point out in the first episode, no one has ever parachuted at this point into the desert for very good reason.
Mm-hmm.
Unexpected, uncontrollable, unforeseen sandstorms, high winds, it's not a place conducive to jump into. Let's see. So their very first mission, November 1941, was a parachute drop in support of Operation Crusader Offensive. Due to the German resistance and adverse weather condition, the mission was a disaster. 22 men, a third of the unit, were killed and or captured. So this is the very first mission. They go out and parachute, and they literally jump into a sandstorm. It's insane. And the second mission was a major success, transported by the Long Range Desert Group, which is very cool to see them in action on the show. It attacked 3 airfields in Libya, destroying 60 aircraft without a single loss. In September 1942, it was renamed the first ASA, consisting at that time of 4 British squadrons, 1 Free French, 1 Greek, and a Phobalt section. So this is a very cool show. I like the way it's done. The very first scene, just to show you where the British Army was at that point in the war early on. I mean, it was early on for us, but it wasn't early on for them. The opening scene, there's a huge convoy just roaming through the desert, just driving through the desert, and all of a sudden they stop. And one of the officers comes up to the front of the convoy to the Jeep at the head, and he's talking to his superior officer, and he's like, "Now would be a good time to bring up the Petro truck, sir." And the officers are staring off into the horizon. He's like, "Please tell me you brought Petro trucks, sir." The officer looks at him and says, "No, I did not bring any Petro trucks, because I can assure you that every vehicle in this convoy has enough fuel to travel 500 kilometers. The exasperated soldier looks at him and says, "Sir, the target to which we are to go to provide reinforcements and supplies is 500 miles. And the commander said, "Yes, but we have French working in the motor pool." And so things were such a quandary and such a cluster F that this area that they've been holding down for like 124 days against the Germans needed resupply and reinforcements. They sent a convoy of reinforcements, and because of language communication errors, the trucks were fueled for a 500-kilometer travel when they had to go 500 miles. Now, for those of you who don't know exactly how that breaks down, just keep in mind a 5K race is 3.2 miles. So you can do the math from there. How many hundreds of miles that they were going to be short on delivering gas. And so what happens is one of these commandos comes up with an idea. Hey, we've been taking a pounding here for 124 days. The higher-ups, the command, they what they call General HQ, GHQ, just can't get their act together. So he goes out of his way to bribe a dock worker to let him know and to mislabel some parachutes. And so they mislabel some parachutes. He goes, picks them up. And him and one other founding member who was also a British commando, they were the first ones to ever do a jump in the desert. Because their whole thing was, let's prove this can be done. Then we can go to GHQ, tell them it can be done, that we've done it, and get permission to form this group. And they do the first jump, and one of them gets severely injured. And so it goes from there. But as we're reading in this description, they're originally called the L Detachment Special Air Services Brigade, the L designation, and air service name being a tie-in to the British disinformation campaign. And one of the reasons for the disclaimer on the show about how things seem so ludicrous that they couldn't possibly be real, but they were, as these 3 guys and commandos were coming up with this idea to make the first Desert Parachute Brigade, there's a commander in the disinformation realm who came up with the idea of kind of like we did with the Ghost Army before D-Day, spreading lies about this brigade that didn't exist and putting inflatable, tanks and tents and all that. So then when the Germans flew over, it looked like we had a brigade. Well, he had spent months spreading all this false information, leaving paperwork around marked top secret, and hiring actors and designing uniforms, and literally polluting the area with quote-unquote mislocated top secret documents about this parachute brigade. And just so happens, as these three guys are going to GHQ to try to get permission to start this, they're like, well, hey, our intelligence people are spreading this information about a non-existing group of parachutes. These guys want to form it. We know that it's going to be a catastrophe. We know they're going to have high, losses. So what a better way to prove that this non-existing parachute brigade exists than when the Germans take prisoners or find dead bodies and them wearing uniforms. And so just how everything stacks up. But it's a damn good show. And it's even though it's epic and it's on MGM, it's all done by the BBC, and it's all British production. The uniforms are right.
So is it being made currently?
It's on the air currently. I'm already 4 episodes in.
Are you, from your standpoint, I mean, we both have a pretty good grip of, and all of our listeners do too, a pretty good grip of the subject, of course. Mm-hmm. You like what you're seeing? I mean,
I think it's great. Once again, there'll be people, what's with the modern music? I don't care. It's a great way to bring people in it. It's a great way to modernize the subject matter, but all the uniforms, everything else is spot on. They just kind of give it that new, exciting way of watching it.
Here, let me throw this out there on the music, okay? And I haven't seen it yet, but you've got me curious. I want to check this out. I will say this. So, did you say they use a good bit of AC/DC?
They do in the battle montages. Like now, when they're at a dance or a pool hall or whatever, they're playing of air 1930s, 1940s music. So you'll hear the swing music and all that. But when they're doing battle montages or training scenes, it's AC/DC. There's one where them and the Long Range Desert Group are driving through the desert, and they got Motorhead playing in the background. Because once again, it's a British production.
Sure. Well, and I'm not fanboying on AC/DC, although I certainly could. But I'm really going to make a point here. I will tell you, again, it's no secret I really listen to a lot of the James Holland We Have Ways podcast. They had Brian Johnson on their show.
Wow.
Brian Johnson, as you know, as I'm sure our listeners know, is the lead singer of AC/DC.
And
he is
just on that point. I think Cliff had a house out on here in Sanibel. So those AC/DC's been known to run around this area down here.
Okay, well, Brian Johnson is a World War II fanatic.
Nice.
Like his uncle, of course, he speaks in this really heavy Irish brogue. I mean, it's an education to itself to listen to him and try to understand what he's saying. And his voice is obviously pretty frayed and cracked from, 50 years of screaming into a microphone.
And race car driving.
Brilliantly, we might add. But he speaks about his uncle, who was like an Irish airborne guy or something. But, I mean, he is big time into World War II history. And, I mean, so much so that James Holland and Al Murray had him on their show.
That's great.
So I'm just throwing that out there that's kind of a little – a little finger hold on, okay, well, it's cool that they picked AC/DC to kind of, you've got me curious here because for two things, because.
Oh, and the Sex Pistols because once again, it's a British production, and so you get the British punk and British hard rock sound, that whole thing.
Well, I'm a Sex Pistols fan too, I gotta be honest.
But it's a good show. I binge watched 4 episodes. Here's how good of a show it is. I'm not a big fanboy of trial viewing crap. But I watched the first 3 episodes. I'm like, what the hell? So I signed up. I signed up for the 7-day trial, and then I set a reminder on my phone on day 7 to go cancel it. But I literally signed up so I can watch this entire show. It's a great show. It's well done.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that because here we are in 2023, and I love the fact that obviously there's still some interest in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know there is because we have listeners, and we want more listeners, and we're here doing what we do because we love it, Don. But I love to think that somebody who's willing to fork over millions and millions of dollars to make a show in this day and age about World War II. And I'm speaking, we know Masters of the Air is coming, right? I mean, that's coming down the pipe. We know that. But so we're talking Rogue Heroes. I mean, that's cool. And I really need to kind of get more going on the Mediterranean theater too.
I want to read the book. And
give me some source material.
JT Rocker 99 on YouTube. You said kind of like Peaky Blinders. It's funny you say that. It's produced by the same people who produce Peaky Blinders. So yes, it has that Peaky Blinders. You never seen Peaky Blinders, right?
I have not.
It's post World War I. All the guys come home. They're British, some Irish, but British street gang members. And so it's post World War I, and they have some modern music in there. And even though it takes place in the 20s and 30s, that you feel like it takes place kind of now. They do a really good job of taking the grainy feel away from the history and making it feel like it's like watching Sons of Anarchy, but it's in the 20s. It's same producers. It's a big budget thing. I'm like watching this. I'm like that's not filmed on a sound stage. I think they actually went into Egypt and found some of these old ruins of these old school forts and that to shoot there, because it's a great show. And
give me. You may have already. I don't think you just answered this. Can you give me some source material?
It comes from the book Rogue Heroes. They produced it for TV based off the book.
Who wrote that?
I don't know. Let's look. Rogue Heroes.
I should know that.
The book. SAS Rogue Heroes. Here we go. Let's just go down to Amazon. Shop Rogue Heroes and Amazon Official. There's the show. Rogue Heroes. Rogue Heroes, the history of the SAS, Britain's secret special forces unit that sabotaged the Nazis and changed the nature of the war, by Ben McIntyre in Random House Audio.
Is it Ben McIntyre?
Yeah. Sorry, it's spelled a little weird. Yeah, MACINTYRE. That may be, actually, I think he did the audio book. Hold on. Yeah, I can't see. No, it said read by the author. I'm trying to figure out who the author is. Oh, Ben McIntyre. Yeah, author and narrator.
Okay, so check it out. I met Ben at the World War II conference back in November.
Get him on the show. I want to talk about the SAS. If you have,
okay, I'll
reach out.
I met him. I don't know that I have his email address. I mean, he gave the keynote address because he wrote the book. My wife is actually reading it now on the Colditz Castle, where they kept prisoners of war.
Yeah.
The Prisoners of Colditz. I mean, I may be getting the name wrong because she's reading it first, then I want to read it. Absolutely delightful British guy. Wonderful sense of humor, incredibly articulate, very prolific. So he wrote the book Rogue Heroes.
Yes, and it's such a good show.
I'll try to reach out to him. I met him. I mean, probably what I need to do is, because I didn't get his phone number or anything.
We'll say this for off the air, but yeah, we'll talk about it off the air. But yeah, it'd be great to have him on the show. But yeah, so if you guys haven't seen this yet, it's on Amazon Video. Like I said, the first 3 episodes you can watch, and then you just sign up for the trial version at MGM Plus, because it's an epic production, BBC. I'll be interested to see where it's shot on site, because what they do is they parachute in, right?
Mm-hmm.
They lost half their guys, as I read, and then the long-range desert team takes them out to the middle of nowhere. It's basically 300 miles from the Germans, 300 miles, and they are literally a no-man's group. They're only given 3 vehicles, and everything else is up to them. Any of the resources they have to steal. They have no mission statement. They have no hierarchy. They're just literally on their own. It's a new group, and they're just sent out there to make their own plans and make their own way. It's pretty crazy. And
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued. Like I said, after I watch the show, I'm going to read it. I'm going to order this book on Amazon.
Well, I want to start checking out the show and read the book, and especially since I met Ben.
The show is well done, and I'm watching some of these scenes where they're at it's this Casablanca style, club in Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
And after doing, background work and the right stuff, I'm watching some of these scenes, I can just see how they shot that day. But no, it's a good show. It's funny. It's funny as hell. And,
well, I'm intrigued.
Yeah. I was super excited. I think it's only 7 or 8 episodes, which is a little bit of a bummer, but It is based off the book, and it's.
But you're saying it's being made now.
No, it's on the air now. It's not being made. You can watch the show now.
So they've made it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, what I'm saying is it streams on MGM Plus, but you can watch it on Amazon Prime Video. You can watch the first 3 episodes, and then you sign up for the 7-day trial for MGM Plus, and you can watch the rest of them.
Okay.
And you just got to remind yourself to, unless you want to pay for MGM Plus, but if not, you got to remind yourself to cancel it, which is easy to do through Amazon. You just go to Amazon and go to subscriptions and hit cancel.
Well, and it will probably be distributed out more widely as time goes on, too.
It could very well, because once again, it's an Epic. Epic is obviously owned by MGM, but I think that's a channel you can get kind of like HBO Showtime. Some of the cable providers offer it, so I know Epic created it, but it's a good show. I would love to see it get a wider release.
I'm very interested. And it makes me want to learn more about the Mediterranean theater too, because like I said earlier, I've always known, Rommel, the Desert Fox. Of course, Rommel ended up going back to Normandy, but the Mediterranean theater is just not my area of. I just haven't read that much on it.
And that's kind of the exciting thing about World War II is after you read a lot about a particular area, you can just throw a dart at a map and, okay, let's start reading about what happened here.
Yeah, no kidding. It's all there, man. If you like World War II airplanes, you've got German Messerschmitt 109s painted in that desert paint scheme, and
they blow the hell out of them on this show.
Tanks, because
that's
all there.
Kind of their mission is they figure, they haven't been successful bombing these airports from above. They've been having a hard time fighting them in dogfights, and so their whole thing is we're going to blow them up on the ground. That's why they're there. So their whole thing is let's go blow. And interestingly enough, today's January 30th. Wow, this month flew by. This day in history, 1943, January 30th, 1943, the British Royal Air Force begins bombing Berlin, Germany. The assault that coincides with Adolf Hitler's 10th anniversary as the German Chancellor was a massive daytime raid. So that happened today in 1943.
Interesting.
So what do you got on your list there, fella?
Well, that what you just said was the absolute perfect segue, and I bet you planned it that way, didn't you?
Oh, yes, because we're all about show prep here.
The perfect segue, because I'm still reading James Holland's book, Big Week, the biggest air battle of World War II, so I'm kind of channeling on B-24s and B-17s, flying over the Reich, flying out of Germany. I've got, if I can turn it to get, for people who are watching, obviously our listeners can't see this, but I've got, this thing's showing some wear. I'm not just super pleased with the way the oxygen mask is showing some dry rot, but this is a mannequin head. I've got an A-14 oxygen mask, an Air Corps flight helmet, and the B-8 one-piece rubber goggles. Got this from a collector probably about 20 years ago, but it's even still got the radio cord coming out the back of the helmet. So this is just in the back shelf of a closet. I had to dig it out from behind a bunch of clothes to get it down, but one day I hope to have a place where I can display this kind of stuff, because right now I just don't have that luxury. But that's to just kind of have a little visual there. But
I want to pause real quick, just because you said the rubber's cracking out, and I actually have one of those masks that was given to me, same thing. Too bad Jeff's not here, because if anybody on this podcast would know how to slow down the aging process of Air Corps gear, it'd be the guy who works for an air museum. So I would send Jeff a text and say, hey, what can I treat this mask with to slow down the aging process and the delamination of the rubber?
Yeah, this thing's been on the back shelf of a closet. I haven't looked at it in a while, and I see one of the straps is just completely failed on it.
Yeah, mine's the same way.
Damn it. But hey, so with that great segue you had, and then me providing a little visual taster there, would it be okay if I just read some select passages from Big Week?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I'll read one, and we'll talk.
Sure.
We'll just get the discussion. Let's just jump right in here. So if you were a bomber pilot in World War II, if you joined the Air Corps, be it as a navigator, a radio operator, a tail gunner, a waist gunner, a pilot, a co-pilot, before you could do anything, you had to get in theater. This little paragraph right here goes into some detail on how the 445th Bomb Group just got there, just got to Europe. Meanwhile, at Tibbenham, the newly arrived members of the 445th Bomb Group were settling into their new environment and working up to go into action. The crews had flown over in their longer-range B-24s, using a route from Florida south to Puerto Rico, British Guiana, and Brazil, now an ally, then across the Atlantic to Dakar in West Africa, on to Morocco, and then north to England. It took 2 weeks, and Captain Jimmy Stewart had flown much of that's the actor, Jimmy Stewart, had flown much of the way himself, riding with Lieutenant Lloyd Sherrard's crew. They had lost one crew, the Sunflower Sioux, which had also been carrying a further 4 passengers, including Stewart's master sergeant. Out over the Atlantic, they had given a mayday, then disappeared. One of Stewart's first tasks on reaching Tibbenham was to write letters to the families of the 14 men who had been lost, possibly the most unenviable task of an air commander. Cold and wet, and this is just one more paragraph describing the general conditions of the base. Cold and wet, Tibbenham, like all other air bases, covered a vast area that included accommodation for some 6,000 men, as well as all the offices, ammunition dumps, fuel stores, firing butts, hangars, and workshops. In many ways, airfields such as Tibbenham were like small new towns. Hastily built concrete roads linked the various parts of the complex, but plenty of rough tracks, puddles, and mud remained. Their last staging post had been Marrakesh. The contrast could not have been starker. Stewart was sharing quarters with Captain Howard Kreidler, CO of the 701st Bomb Squadron, in a flat-roofed concrete and brick barracks block. It was basic, with a single Franklin stove for heat, which they soon got working, but better than the Nissen and Quonset huts that housed the majority of crews.
It blows my head. We often forget how many of our quote-unquote celebrities served in the war. I'm talking about Jimmy Stewart and
Clark Gable.
What was the reporter who would always do like the last 10 minutes on 60 Minutes in his?
Oh, Andy
Rooney.
Andy Rooney.
Yeah. Not to roll back, but I was doing a little Google searching. So Rogue Heroes, this is a little crazy. It's only 2023 right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rogue Heroes Season 1 came out in 2022. There's already DVD box sets of it on eBay and Amazon. So I'm going to look into that. I'll let you know if it's related. That way, if you can't find it on Amazon, we just,
Let me know. So the paragraph I just read, the thing that jumps out at me, man, I mean, you can talk about the equipment itself, but the logistics that I just described, I mean, that route just to get from the United States to Europe, that is just unbelievable.
Well, not only is it unbelievable, but it's all right where you just get in the plane and fly east. No, we were talking about Wing of Prayer last week, and Harry Crosby, who ended his career as like one of the best navigators in the 8th Air Force, he was asked when heading home, instead of taking a ship, they put him on a plane. And the lead navigator for the trip back home to the United States got sick and couldn't fly, and they asked him if he would do it, and he was nervous about doing it. He didn't think he could find a way back, and so first he said no, and then when it was going to lengthen the amount of time for him to get home until they found a navigator, he finally said yeah, but he had to basically do a bunch of homework.
Mm-hmm.
He had to do, because navigating is more than just point and come. You have to know the wind speed and everything else, and
dead reckoning
and all that
pilotage
stuff. Yeah, and so it takes more than just a pilot and a compass to get to where you have to know a lot. And back then, I would love to know how those, what was it, the W3-6B computer, what was that?
They had I know when I took flying lessons, and we're obviously a long time after that, back then they used, of course everything's digitally computerized now, but the EA6B was what they used back then. But now for those guys, oh man, I'm not sure. You can do a quick Google search on that right now if you can.
I think it looks like a giant protractor, it's insane. Yeah, the flight computer.
Of course, the Navy guys had, the metal board, navigation boards that they they carried with them into the ready rooms, and when they went out and strapped in the cockpits, they took them and slid it up under the instrument panel.
But
And I'd love to have one of those.
Well, like you said, the technology or lack thereof, really. I mean, it was great technology for what they had, but by our comparison, your car and your GPS in your car is like a spaceship to what they had back then.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But think about the skill.
Mm-hmm.
Just the sheer skill. I mean, my hat's off to the intelligence, the skill, the knowledge that those guys used. I mean, they didn't have the technology that we have now. I mean, I just took my Subaru in this afternoon and had something done to it because it was showing a bunch of fault codes and warning lights
update.
Do I?
Needed a firmware update.
No, it actually wasn't that, but I don't want to get into it. It'd take precious minutes, and our listeners don't want to hear about it. But it made me think of it because of the technology that it can provide information overflow, but at the same time, it's just in a way it kind of dumbs things down. I mean, back in those days, man, those guys had to know their aircraft. They had, hell, you had a flight engineer whose job, especially on the Lancaster, because the British Lancaster, their main heavy bomber, he had no co-pilot. You got one pilot, then you got a flight engineer who's sitting up there in that cockpit. His job is to manage all the gauges, all the levers, all the buttons, and watch everything so the pilot could just fly the damn airplane.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanics, the complication of everything. I mean, the complexity of everything. I just have so much respect for those guys.
Well, as Henry Crosby pointed out in Wing of Prayer, there's 10 guys per plane, right? It takes 6 guys it takes 6 ground crew guys per person on that plane to keep one airplane up in the air. So basically, every single plane had 60 guys working on one plane. Mm-hmm. So it took 60 ground crew guys, mechanics, what have you, who worked basically tirelessly. When those planes came down, they were working all night long, loading them up, repairing them, doing everything they could to make them flight worthy for the next mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took a tremendous amount of work to keep those things up. And
imagine working far into the night when it's bitterly cold and you're in a drafty hangar and when I don't want to take away from your next comment, but I got a paragraph. The next paragraph I wanted to read was describing their quarters.
Yeah, go ahead.
So picking up where I left off after the guys got over to Tibbenham, among those also settling in were the men of Bullet Serenade, piloted by Lieutenant George Wright. While Wright and his fellow officers had been put into a Quonset hut, the enlisted men had been allocated a Nissen hut. These cheap and easy-to-erect buildings look like giant cylinders sliced in half and put on a concrete base, with roofs and walls made from semicircular sheets of corrugated iron. The waist gunner and third engineer was Sergeant John Robbie Robinson from Memphis, Tennessee, who had turned 22 only that month. So this is going to be home, he thought, as he walked into their allotted hut. 6 beds either side, brick walls at each end, 2 dangling light bulbs hanging on cords, and a pot-bellied stove in the middle. Outside was an unfinished block that contained latrines, showers, and washstands, though no evidence of any hot water. That evening they were issued only sea rations, a rather tasteless hash. It was Thanksgiving Day, 1943.
And so you had a hierarchy per plane. You had the pilots, the co-pilots, the officers, if you will. They stayed in the Quonset hut. The enlisted men, i.e. the gunners, the ball turret gunners, and they stayed in the Nissen hut. And as the aforementioned ground crew, unless it's snow and in blizzard conditions, they actually lived in pyramid tents. So there was a clear hierarchy, like a decent place, halfway decent plate, tent. And it was strictly based on what your role was in that operations. Do you have another entry you want to go over?
Oh, yeah, this is jumping ahead to talking about Adolf Galland, German Luftwaffe officer. Some of his frustrations trying to deal with Adolf Hitler and just the general situation that they were facing.
I can imagine.
Let's see. All right, let's just jump in right here. Meanwhile, Galland's fighter pilots continued to take off and meet whatever incoming American missions were launched into the bleak winter weather. Second of JG Second, which included Heinz Noka's 5th Staffel, was now based at Plant Luna, southwest of Bremen. On 18 November, he led his Staffel against another American raid, but they failed to make an interception, and when it was time to turn for home, the weather had closed in, and the light began to fade. Worrying they wouldn't make it back to base, Noka radioed to the airfield of St. Trond in Belgium instead. Below, Holland and Belgium lay covered in snow after some heavy blizzards, and Noka was concerned about icing. It could badly affect the weight of the aircraft as well as the controls. He could feel his breath freezing on the inside of his oxygen mask.
I can only imagine. I mean, just that last line, you could feel your oxygen freezing on the inside of your oxygen mask. And what a lot of people who aren't familiar with that, which I really wasn't until recently, is your clothes are plugged in with a cable. They have literally electric pajamas on underneath their suits. And as you can imagine, your movement is limited by the length of that cord, that umbilical cord, if you will. And I can only imagine being like a waist gunner. You're spinning, you're moving, but then you got to rotate, maybe step a few steps away to grab a new can of ammo. How quickly that wire could become a hindrance. And then you'd have to unplug it long enough to sort yourself out, but then you get cold real quick and you got to plug it back in. And I can only imagine how long it took 6-volt pajamas to warm up back in. I don't think they're on 12 volt. I think it's probably on 6. And just the whole environment and being in those aircraft, just as we mentioned before, it's the aeronautical equivalent of being on a submarine almost, except for the submarines are a whole lot bigger. But it's just one of those, and you had a little bit of a chance to survive if the unforeseen were to happen.
And you talk about the electrically heated flying suits. I mean, those things, in 1943, I'm sure that they were prone to failure pretty often.
Yeah. I'm going to read a brief thing out of Wing and a Prayer because
yeah, please.
I think it's interesting when we hear groups doing things that you don't think to do. Perfect example. A lot of people didn't know until they read your father's book that, we got to Okinawa. They made us turn around and go pick up everything bigger than a 50 cal round. Great, we're doing cleanup. That's great for morale. But this was great for morale, and this is an awesome part of the story that you never hear before. Let me see.
Really looking forward to reading this book that you got there.
On April 20th, more attacks on railroad marshaling yards. On that day, the Soviet and American armies met at the Elbe River, and Germany was cut in half. There remained nothing for the 8th Air Force Bomb Group to hunt. What do we do now? On May 1st, the 100th went to Wackenburg. The lead bombardier dropped parachutes containing large white crosses, which were to mark where our 37 planes at 400 feet would drop 71.7 tons of supplies. Over the Hague, our crews saw Dutch people on rooftops waving American and English flags. On May 1st, the Russians raised their flags over the Reichstag. On that day, our crews flew over Holland at 500 feet and dumped 70 tons of 10-in-1 rations on the racetrack of the airfield near Hague. On May 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 6th, we dropped more food. Coming back over, our crews reported that these were, quote, the most pleasant missions they had ever flown. On the ground, everywhere, people waved signs in the field saying, "Thank you, Americans." I felt better about Operation Manna Chow Hound. Manna being manna from heaven, which is what the British want to call it. Chow Hound is what we want to call it because it was basically a food and supply drop over all these areas that the Germans had occupied for so long. Now we ran them out of there, but the people, there was still no food. I mean, the Germans had already consumed all of it. We also flew what we called revival missions, on which 5-man crew would fly into Germany, land at a Luftwaffe base, pick up as many as 40 POWs, and bring them back to Paris. The 8th Air Force flew out 8,000 U.S. and 1,500 British. Many of our crews saw friends from the 100th. Most of them had lost 40 or 50 pounds. On May 2nd, 38 of our planes dropped 70 tons of supplies over Schiphol. Planes went over the drop area in single file, skimming the train, pulling up and missing buildings and smokestacks. There was a heavy roar as pilots changed propeller pitch to adjust their altitude. All the crews took their supply of fresh fruit, the fresh oranges that the first oranges that had been seen in months, to drop to the Dutch. They could see the faces of people waving and praying. On May 3rd, the 100th bomb dropped another 70 tons of supplies in Bergen, and the same load over Hilversum. The supplies were in burlap bags, and our flyers saw them explode as they hit the ground. Reports came back from about, quote, happiness hats. During the war, the resistance and underground had to hide their parachutes since they were evidence of the American airmen coming down in the area and evidence that we had helped them. Now the silk came out. They were dyed vivid colors and fashioned into hats, scarves, skirts, so bright in color that we could see them from the air. Now they were proud symbols of those who had helped the escaped invaders from the Germans. And so it got to a point where after we ran the Germans out, let's start using planes for supply drops.
Yeah.
And that's not, that's one of those things you don't ever really hear about, but it's what we did. And they were talking about how they would take their supplies as well, like their candies and their chocolate bars, and they would save them up for like a week or so, all the guys, and then they would invite all the kids from local town and have like parties for them so they can get this candy and these fruits and stuff, and just, try to help, not only help the community and help the kids, but help their spirit, because here they are, for the last year or so, depending on how many missions they flew. Harry flew, I think, close to 32.
Mm-hmm.
When your job is just to indiscriminately bomb and destroy cities, now you have a chance to kind of, instead of take life, kind of try to rebuild it in your own little way by providing sustenance and food and supplies to people who've been beaten down and taken advantage of for so long by the Germans.
And I'd read also of what you just passed over there about how they started flying POWs around trying to get people, replaced into their proper, helping American guys get home or
they're really sick. It's a quicker way to get them to a more well-equipped hospital with better surgeons than throwing them on a deuce and a half and driving them over bumpy roads and taking a long road.
Of course, yeah.
But on that note, we've been reading a lot of books. I know you're reading the one you spoke of earlier. You and I were talking on Saturday. I just finished Winging a Prayer, and Harry Crosby's writing style is so good that I then went to The Deep Woods by Eisenhower's Boy. That was mentioned in The Longest Winter, and so I went out and bought it, and I know one of our listeners said they bought it too. And I jumped into that book, and I had to pull out of it. Not saying it's a bad book. The writing styles are so different from coming from Harry Crosby's Winging a Prayer to a book where the first chapter is quoting, newspaper articles and just a lot of logistics and not first-hand account stuff. I know it gets in the first-hand account. So it was such a juxtaposition. It's almost got a proverbial nosebleed. So instead, I went back to the care package of one Jeff Copsetta and the books he sent. And we've all seen the movie, but I was interested to read the book, and so I started The Longest Day. And so I'm still staying in the European theater, but I'm going back on the ground and reading The Longest Day, which is very interesting because, as they point out in the forwarder, Cornelius Ryan had access to a lot of German paperwork, diaries and such.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're reading this, he transitions back and forth between what's going on the Allied side and on the German side, but he doesn't write it in which, as we often talk about, a lot of people do, you don't have boogeyman syndrome on here. It's here's what's going on, and here's some people's thoughts on Hitler and how, he was messing things up. Here's what was going on with Hitler. And so it goes back and forth explaining why the Atlantic Wall, quote unquote, wasn't as fortified as they wanted it to be, because up to a certain point they thought the war had been won, and so why waste of resources. And then as time got closer and closer to D-Day, they started getting more paranoid, and Hitler basically called out an all-out front as let's get the Atlantic Wall done. And so they started pouring all these resources and, sadly, slave labor into building all these concrete reinforcements that, luckily for us, it happened this way.
Mm-hmm.
Basically because they, last-minute Johnny, they didn't have enough concrete to do all the things they needed to do. They didn't have enough steel to make the big guns rotate and move. Basically, that's why a lot of them were fixed. They only went up and down and moved a little bit to left, right, because they cobbled this stuff together so many at the last moment that they didn't have the resources. Concrete was hard to find. Steel was hard to find.
And the quality of the concrete they had was not that good.
Yeah, and the fact that you have slave laborers building it, they're not exactly, putting their best interest into it. They kind of want you to fail. And so a lot of that stuff came to our advantage. I mean, could you imagine how the cost the Navy could have possibly taken during D-Day if those large cannons were able to articulate and have a better range of motion instead of being kind of stationary?
Definitely. When you bring up, it made me realize something, and I got an idea, not for tonight, but for another show, talking about, and it would go well if you're reading The Longest Day as you move forward in that. Actually, my buddy John McManus sent it to me. Well, not the actual paper document. It's an image, a picture of it, a questionnaire that Cornelius Ryan, this is like back in 1967, 68, maybe 1970, probably getting ready, researching that very book that he sent. He sent it to thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers, of veterans, one of whom was my uncle.
Really?
My Uncle Edward, who you've heard me talk about it on this show, my dad's older brother. He was a tank platoon commander in the 741st Tank Battalion and landed at Normandy, fought his way across. I saw John McManus dug it up where my uncle answered that questionnaire. Wow. It's about a 3-page.
That's awesome.
I'm telling you, we could do a show on that.
Yeah, I'm actually looking through the folder because in the book it says that during his planning on this book, he basically... I think not he did the same thing in the United States, but over in Europe and Germany, I think they said he posted over 350 back in my day we had newspapers, and in the newspaper you would have the listing of jobs and all
the classifieds.
Yeah, he basically posted like over 350 different classified ads trying to looking for World War II vets. And he said they had like 6,000 responses, and like out of those 6,000, he basically took in the 1,300 that had the most detail, and plus sending out all those like your uncle got. And so that's cool that you actually have a copy of not only that questionnaire but your uncle's handwriting filling it out. That's awesome.
Well, it's unfortunately because the actual document is archived, but I've got John McManus sent me a good enough. Good enough pictures of it that I've got it on my computer.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that we could do a show just reading that, and we could just go back and forth, volley back and forth on The Longest Day.
Sure.
And leaven it up with some questions from that questionnaire and my uncle's answers, because I read through it. It's about maybe 4 pages, and it really was enlightening to me. It helped me understand. It answers some questions, that'd be a great little show right there.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. But I think that's pretty much everything I have. Anything else you want to go over before we call it quits?
No, I think, I'm here in Big Week. I am on page 181. I got a ways to go yet. So, maybe, the cool thing is, man, we can just toss a paragraph in from our favorite book and move on with a discussion, whether it's about that or something else. It's all just this great stew that we like to consume, And
a little update for the stickers. I know a lot of you all who sign up for Patrons, where are my stickers at? I've been working on them, and the delay has been the font on our slug line, your favorite World War II based podcast. The smaller the sticker gets, the smaller that bottom font gets, and so I've actually had to change the font. But I got a good batch of them I'm sending out, so some of you will be getting them sent out this week, and they will be in the mail. But I've been going through a lot of quality control and research and development on the best way to go about making these stickers and changing the font a little bit on just the slug line, because the original font is stenciled, but the vinyl just falls apart. So for those of you who are signed up waiting for your stickers, they're coming your way, I promise. Each one of them is made by love and frustration here in the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast studio by yours truly. We will get those out to you guys. But I want to thank each and every one of you for your continued support. And thank you guys for sending us emails and watching us on YouTube. JT Rocker's here every Monday. He's always hanging out in the comments. I want to thank him. And for the rest of you who watch it in real time and in post time, you can go back and watch the video at any time and leave comments, and we will go back. And so even if you're not watching live, you're watching it later, please feel free to leave a comment, and we will answer it back and get back to you. But for myself, Henry, and Jeff Copsetta, we want to thank each and every one of you, and we will be back Monday. Yeah, sounds like a good thing. Yeah, we'll shoot for Monday. See y'all later.
This has been a Digital 410 production.